So, Russ, welcome to the podcast. It's so lovely to have you on this podcast because every conversation I have has tech at the heart of it.
Right.
And the UK is the third largest tech ecosystem in the world behind the US and China. We have the most globally relevant technologies. In fact, we're the home of AI, fintech, and climate tech. And our Venture Pulse report that we produce every quarter consistently demonstrates that the UK attracts the most venture funds across Europe. So I'm absolutely delighted to have you here. You
Great to be
run
here.
London Tech Advocates, Global Tech Advocates. You're an ambassador for the Mayor of London around technology. So you've got a really deep perspective around the role of tech and the evolutions that we are facing into. I'd like to start by exploring the biggest challenges facing today's businesses and how you see that.
Sure, and great to be here. Thank you for having me. I think when I look at what's going on, we're going through an exponential change as it relates to technology. And I think for businesses, many of them are struggling and grappling to understand what should I be doing with my business with respect to technology, training up my employees, the advent of AI, and what does that mean for my business? So informing and educating people about what they should be doing, I think is a key priority. And I think that then moves into a broader challenge that I think we face, particularly here in Britain, but around the world, is workforces are not equipped as we need them to be with the digital AI and green skills that are required for the next generation. So that to me is one of the biggest challenges to address, and I'm sure we'll come back to that topic. And then the other thing that I see, and this relates more to startups and scale-ups, because that's where I spend the bulk of my time with these growing businesses, is around the capital required to ensure that these businesses can grow, they can become tech unicorns, they can become significant tech companies. So those are the two key pieces that I look at from a challenge point of view. And then I guess the third piece is the environment, not just the environment around the planet, but the geopolitical landscape, and how can that impact what's happening with technology from a regulation point of view, from a, market access point of view. Can I trade in this country? Can I do business here? Can I do business there? So those are the big challenges that I see.
Yeah, it's such an interesting because you talk about the environment, the geopolitical angle, which we'll look at some of the regulatory aspects in a minute. But it's been phenomenal to watch what you've achieved there. So London Tech Advocates you set up in 2013.
Yes.
Global Tech Advocates in 2016.
2015.
2015.
Yeah, okay.
For those who aren't familiar with what you do, what was the ambition you had around those networks?
The idea came to me in 2012. The last role I had, I was at Skype until we were bought by Microsoft, and it was my third exit in my career financially. Did very well, and I thought, I don't need to do this anymore. I'm very fortunate, thank goodness, whoever's watching up above has been looking after me in that regard. But I felt like I wasn't done with my career. I had turned 50 at the time, and I just thought, there's something that I want to do, and I'd like to give back to tech because tech had been very good to me. And in 2012, we had the coalition government under David Cameron, and I met a gentleman called Rohan Silva who set up something called the Tech City Advisory Board. I was invited to join that. I had briefly met our then mayor at the time, Boris Johnson, who was out there promoting London's emerging tech scene. And I thought, this is great that the government is actively promoting this emerging, burgeoning tech scene. But what was missing for me was a group of leaders from the private sector coming together saying, how can we better support the startups on the scene? What do they need in terms of mentoring, investment? And that's where the idea came from. But I also wanted to do something a bit different, which was there are wonderful trade associations out there. There are different clubs and organizations. I wanted to do something that kind of relied on people's better angels, which is let's make this a volunteer community. So everybody in our community is a volunteer, just giving that little bit extra to do some bigger things for us collectively. And I do all of this pro bono as my give back to tech. So an underlying value and ethos of we're really here to help one another for the greater good.
It's a really powerful network. So we know we've been in many meetings together,
yes.
Whether it's influencing, and really what comes through is that power of the collective. And I think it is very strong because of the voluntary nature of it. People feel real passion and alignment with your purpose.
Yes, we try not to forget that this is a community of individuals helping each other, connecting with each other. It's a fabulous network. And literally every day in my inbox, I'm signposting people, let's connect you to this person, let's connect you to that person. And the reward for me is people will come back to me and say, I met so-and-so through a TLA event, or, we spoke to this investor and we got funding. And the bigger picture is fabulous. The UK is the third largest tech ecosystem in the world, but we try not to forget that it is individuals who make this happen.
You talked a little bit about skills earlier, and there has been a lot of conversation in recent years around lack of tech skills, and those skills are evolving as we see technology evolving. What do you think needs to be done or can be done to face into that skill shortage?
I've been pretty vocal that, and we now have a new government here in the UK in place, and I think the government has a fantastic opportunity to convene the nation, to convene companies, to say, we need to do a collective initiative to reskill and upskill British workers in these various areas. And I don't expect the government to fund or pay for all of this. We've seen companies like Google and Microsoft and BT spending millions on training people across the country on digital skills, on AI skills. But we have to really get serious about it. And I would go so far as saying, I'd love to see every adult in the UK get at least 6 months of digital and AI skills training. And can we create the mechanism so that if you need to step away from your job or 6 months or 12 months, you can do that knowing that you're going to come back a much more enriched and well-trained individual for the roles and jobs of the future. And coming back to my comment on productivity, I actually think if we were to do this relatively quickly, the return that we'll see from that investment could happen in the near term. And I know we're seeing this new government come in and looking at what they can do over the next 5 years. But I just think if you enhance British productivity through our workforce, that would be well received by companies and individuals across the nation.
I think you're absolutely right. I think the government, business, and educators working together is the only way to solve this.
Absolutely vital. And, we're not the only country dealing with this. Many others are as well. I travel the world a lot, but I do think we're falling a bit behind in terms of really understanding that in order to secure this position as the third largest tech ecosystem in the world, we're going to have to do things like that because there are many other nations out there that are looking at tech as their way forward.
Yeah, and talking about tech and the way forward, you just talked about the Disability Resource Hub. How important do you think that is, that sort of diverse perspective as we look to the future of technology? And I know we're sort of moving into sort of development of technology, but how do you see that?
Hugely critical. And I actually think the lack of diversity, the lack of inclusion that we have in our technology sector is our biggest weakness. A sector that is largely driven by white men is just not sustainable in terms of future innovation, future ideas, future creativity. And I, through our working groups like our Women in Tech and Black Women in Tech groups and many other organizations, I am always so hugely impressed with the caliber of people, the caliber of ideas that is out there. And I just keep thinking, how can we do a better job of bringing more of those people into the sector? Because we will create better technology as a result of it. We will make it more accessible to more users. So I'm always pleased and sometimes astonished at how far we've come. But then I kind of think, we could go so much further if we had more women in tech, if we had more people from different ethnic backgrounds and skills and disabilities in our sector. That would be amazing. And we haven't, to be honest, we have to be honest, we haven't moved the needle. We've been talking about this for years, and I know that there's a growing frustration out there that the needle is not moving. I think the good news is many companies, many organizations are aware that this has got to be a much bigger priority, but how we're actually doing is lagging behind.
Yeah, but talking about female leaders, you and I are both judging at the Tech Innovator Award this year.
Which is fantastic, yes.
It is indeed, and this year's winner, Halo Cycle, was founded by and led by a woman. And what was interesting is, you sort of organisations like that are the disruptors that we actually need to help larger corporates evolve and transition.
Yes, and I, having worked in large corporates in the earlier part of my career, bigger organizations are very risk averse. And so getting closer to those disruptors and those innovators and, the Tech Innovators competition, I think is just a brilliant way to showcase the great companies that are all across the UK and the leaders in those organizations and how they present themselves and how they think about disruption or what gets them out of bed in the morning in terms of that idea that they have that they know can fundamentally be something that makes our lives better. That's really powerful. And I hope more larger organizations do much more work to engage with those groups, like, like KPMG does with this competition as one example. Many other large organizations have been shying away from that, or they're saying that they're doing things, but are they really? And I think that is a missed opportunity for both British PLC and a number of other companies around the world.
That's really important because UK attracts the second highest level of funding globally in terms of venture money for growing businesses. And some of that will be coming from corporate money, some of it will be VC money, and the opportunity there for companies to be engaged and involved. And that brings me on to the topic about, how do we have some amazing businesses. Some have gone on to become unicorns. Some of them have gone on to move elsewhere. How do we keep nurturing that and that environment? And how do we encourage and keep those businesses in the UK?
Yeah, I think we have a lot of work to do in that regard. I think what I've seen over the past 10 or 15 years is that Britain has become much more of a nation of entrepreneurs. And, I meet people all the time who are saying, I want to leaving behind my day job. I've got an idea. I really want to see if I can strike out and create a company or business that's going to be a success. And I think that's absolutely fantastic. We have some mechanisms in place in terms of getting funding behind these ideas. I think the Enterprise Investment Scheme, which has been around for 11 or 12 years, I would have never become an angel investor without it. And many other people feel the same. But given what I said a little bit earlier, that the scaling capital piece of this has been missing. Although I'm starting to see some encouraging signs. I know you were at the International Investment Summit earlier this week, and announcements about a national wealth fund and British growth partnership in the British Business Bank to help unlock the funds that pension funds have to invest in patient capital. Fantastic. I was saying, hallelujah, that's great. We've got to move with great speed and urgency. So that piece needs to be stronger. And then, you look at the markets. How do we make it easier and more straightforward for IPOs to take place in the UK rather than every company I meet saying, oh, I want to go to the NASDAQ to list. And, Julia Hoggett from the London Stock Exchange has done a brilliant job introducing many reforms and initiatives to say, we want the London Stock Exchange to be that preeminent IPO market in the world. So I see really good things happening. My focus is how do we implement on those things very quickly, because every other nation around the world is moving quickly as well. And we don't want to lose that preeminent position in terms of our tech ecosystem.
It's not just about London, because albeit the majority of money comes into London, we have some brilliant pockets of tech
Everywhere.
clusters across the UK,
Yep.
amazing tech clusters. Is there anything else that can be done? I mean, the scaling, I absolutely agree with you in terms of the funding and making sure I'm unlocking pension money. Actually, one of the big themes that did come out of the summit was this 10 plus year horizon.
Yes.
And it's actually quite nice to hear somebody say that, because, the investment horizons, whether it's companies, institutional investors or savers, is so diverse. Actually, to have somebody say, you have to think 10 years
Absolutely.
ahead. But is there anything else that we could do across the regions?
Yes. We have to do a much better job showcasing what is happening across our regions. I meet fabulous founders, entrepreneurs, scaling businesses up and down this country. We have, beyond our London group, we have 5 other groups in Global Tech Advocates, one in the north of England, one in West England, one in Wales, one in Scotland, and one in Northern Ireland. And so I get wonderful insights and great connections to leaders in all of those hubs. And what's going on around this country is phenomenal. I was in Belfast. We relaunched our Northern Ireland group back in March, and the 2 women who lead that group have a business that's called Awaken Hub, Mary and Claire, and they just focus on supporting female founders in Northern Ireland. And then there's a lot of US investment that goes into the Republic of Ireland, but also going into Northern Ireland because of historical connections. And a lot of that investment, for example, is going into cyber startups and scale-ups, because Northern Ireland has some really good companies and good universities that focus on that. That's just one example. Scotland, I think, is going to be a leader in green energy. We heard Iberdrola of Spain, as part of this summit, say that they're going to invest another 24 billion pounds of funding over the next 5 years into the UK, into Scottish Power, and into the energy infrastructure to overhaul the national grid, because our grid was built for fossil fuels and not renewables. Wales, world leader in compound semiconductors. So we can talk about silicon chips, but compound semiconductors are really important for the renewable industry. And South Wales is a world leader. So making sure that people know and understand that, and that we're constantly working up and down the UK to better support each other. And one of the critiques I hear is that obviously we have a lot of the venture funds based in London. Many of the regions are saying we're not seeing enough of them, where they're not getting out to Cardiff or to Glasgow or to Manchester to really understand from a grassroots point of view what's going on and how they can invest better in those scaling businesses. But we have some great companies all across this nation.
Is there anything that you're seeing in the global network of global tech advocates that we could be learning here?
Yes, I travel to many different hubs and I try and see what's going on in places like Singapore and Dubai. I mean, Dubai has done a phenomenal job attracting both money and talent, making it easy for foreign nationals to live and work and set up companies there. And for example, many Indian companies are expanding in Dubai because they're finding it easier to do business there. Singapore, I think, does a good job in terms of that public-private sector relationship. Government's very involved in Singapore. Sometimes they've said to me they feel almost a bit too much so, but that public sector, private sector relationship is important. And I think we can do a much better job learning from them about how to bring some of that thinking here. But I also think the area that excites me is the Global South. We now have groups in Ghana, in Nigeria. We can talk about India separately, Brazil. I've been to all of those places over the past couple of years. And I always think, if you're an entrepreneur in Nigeria or Brazil, and you're building a good business, you've had so many hurdles thrown at you because the governance is not there, the infrastructure is not there, but some of the businesses that they're creating are also, coming back to the start of our conversation, focused on net zero and sustainability, looking at agri-tech and how our food system can be more efficient, looking at the climate. I was so impressed with what I saw in Brazil with the number of climate tech and agri-tech businesses really kind of coming to grips with what they believe is, Brazil's future. They've got to fix, from their point of view, they're worried about the Amazon. So that mindset, but also the ideas that are percolating in these places, we should stay close to and learn from them in terms of how they've overcome their hurdles. So go to the other hubs. It could be Silicon Valley. I was in Shanghai last month. There's a lot of good stuff going on, but I like to go to these other places that are not on people's radar because that's where a lot of fascinating innovation is going to come from.
But it's also because they're dealing with unique challenges that aren't just climate related. They, the biodiversity, and you talk about agriculture. Even when we did the Tech Innovator, do you remember? But probably about half of those businesses had some form of agri-tech.
They did.
Or bio sort of solution.
Yes. It is. And to me, another place for that is India.
Yeah.
We did a Global Tech Advocate Summit to India, nearly 2 years ago now. And we all left feeling like India is going to be such an integral part of our future. I felt, we talk about US number 1, China number 2, UK number 3, India's number 4, but I keep saying to people, 20 years, India's going to be number 1. They're being really smart about how they're building their technology infrastructure, what they're doing with their population. But we met so many entrepreneurs. They were focused on agri-tech. They were focused on water. They were focused on, how do you take rubbish out of Mumbai and what do you do with that? They're focused on health tech and healthcare, a massive population that is still growing. So there are wonderful ideas there. And so for me, what I try and do in my role at GTA is, as I find these interesting companies or examples, is how do we quickly share this across our network for people to say, take a look at what they're doing. It may not be 100% relevant, but you'll probably get some good insights from them that can help you with your business.
We've talked a little bit about the new government.
Mm-hmm.
As the new government sort of settles in terms of its priorities, what do you think their priorities should be in this sector?
Well, I think overall they need to set a pro-business friendly agenda. And I know initially there have been some concerns about that, and we heard some initial negativity about the state of things, the way they found them from the previous government. But I think I'd like to see them get on the front foot in terms of focusing on the future. They've talked about the importance of growth, and to focus on a bit more of the positivity about what can be done here collectively. We talked about this International Investment Summit, and I thought that was a really good example of how the government wants to demonstrate to investors and companies from around the world to come here to see for themselves what's going on and to please invest in the UK. So I think more of that will be very important. And then specifically as it relates to science, innovation, and technology, I'd like to see some continuity from the previous government strategies, particularly the international technology strategy, which included quantum, it included AI, it included semiconductors, and to understand what they want to do with that, I think is very important. The message around skills that I shared earlier is something that I hope they embrace. And I know we've got Skills England now set up to take a look at that agenda, but it's not yet clear to me what their objectives and priorities are, but we'll hopefully find out more about that. And then I don't think we can lose sight of the importance of visa and immigration and making sure that we have a pipeline of overseas skilled talent coming to the UK. One of the reasons I believe that the UK has done so well with its tech ecosystem is we've done a really good job of mixing homegrown talent with overseas talent. And that knowledge exchange or knowledge transfer has been a vibrant part of why we've done so well. So having good visas to come here, but also processes that people go through as they come here can be so vastly improved. I talked to a global talent visa holder who was coming here a couple of years ago, and she was coming from the US, and she said, I would call the home office, the phone would ring, 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 somebody would pick it up and hang it up. And she said, and there's no portal to track how you're doing. And I kept thinking, these are the best and brightest from around the world that we want to come here. And if that's their first impression of us, we've got a lot of work to do to fix that. So it's a fairly broad agenda, but I hope that the government will embrace many of those aspects and address them.
Yeah, and one of the things you talked about is AI, and that was you can imagine at the investment summit, whether it was talking about energy, whether it was talking about health, accelerating innovation, yes. Every single topic had AI somewhere in that conversation. So I'd like to talk about AI.
Sure.
So in KPMG's 2024 CEO Outlook survey, which was released recently, over 70% of CEOs wouldn't be surprised, it surprised you, that put AI as one of its number one investment priorities. However, 61% of them actually were concerned around the ethical challenges of AI. And I also know that the Board Leadership Centre, when we look at how boards perceive AI, they worry about two big things: the accuracy of the output and the quality of the data that's used as an input. And I'd just love to get your advice or advice for companies who are thinking about adopting AI. What can they think about? How should they think about it?
We're in a situation where, credit to OpenAI and ChatGPT, AI has been around for, 15 or 20 years. This is not new, probably even longer than that. But OpenAI really made it available to the masses, which I think has been really, really powerful. And then everybody's piled in. And I often joke, check the startup you're talking about. Everybody's saying they're an AI startup or an AI scaling business. And we know that's not the case. So there's a bit of hype out there as well. But it can be a transformative tool. And I think for me, there's kind of three ways in which businesses can look at it and figure out how best to adopt it. And so when you're thinking about AI, be clear about what your objectives are. The first is cost reduction. I think AI can certainly reduce costs for companies. The second is around productivity. We're already using many of these tools. I always joke with people whenever I'm on a Zoom call, there's Otter.ai or some other thing taking notes. And you look at it afterwards like, oh, it's done a really good job. Well, that's AI in action. Let's not forget that there are these great tools that can make our jobs easier. And then the third area for me is around true transformation using AI. And I don't think many companies are looking at that as the future holy grail. And I think those companies that get there first will be truly successful and the winners down the line. So understand what you can do or what are your priorities. And those priorities might evolve. You might say, look, today it's productivity, but really over the next 24 months, can we really transform our business with AI? So go at it with an open mind. But to your point, understand the ethical issues around AI, understand the data privacy issues associated with that, and understand how your workers feel about it. Because there are workers who love using it. There are workers who are kind of using it on the side saying, I don't think my company wants me to do this, but I'm using it because it's helping me with my job. And many of them are using these tools and thinking, in 2 years, am I going to be out of a job? I think for me, I mean, I'm really excited about AI and its potential and its ability to solve some of the biggest challenges that we have out there. But if you look at some of the data sets that we have out there, companies are now saying, I'm not just going to let any company come and scrape my data off my website for free anymore. Some companies are charging a fee for that. So the companies that are using and developing these large language models might be having problems down the line with the quality and caliber of the data that they're using for these AI models. For example, and try not to get too techie, and I'm not an expert in this space, but a lot of the large language models today have been generated through human text that gets scraped off the internet. But steadily over time, as AI becomes more sophisticated, a lot more of that data is not going to be human text, it's going to be AI-generated text. And people are already starting to look at these models and do tests and saying, the AI-generated text, when you feed that into these models, the models can potentially collapse. So we're piling all of this money and saying AI is going to be the holy grail, but then are we looking at the other end of this and saying, are we going to run out of good data? And will this all be for naught? So I think we just have to take that broader perspective, understand the opportunities that are here, but understand, like with any emerging technology, there are going to be limitations to this. So let's go into it with our eyes wide open.
Yeah, I think that's a really good bit of advice there. And you know, when you talked about data and the quality of data, the flip side of that is the compute power that you need for it, right?
Absolutely.
And so there is a lot of conversation around, you know, large language models, small language models, how you use what you do with memories.
And I think to the point that you were just raising, the cost of doing this, the consumption, the power consumption, the energy consumption that this is undertaking is phenomenal. There was an article, I think it was in The Guardian a couple of months ago, that Ireland looked at this, and of the total electricity use in Ireland, 18% was coming from Irish households, 21% was coming from Irish data centers. And so you kind of say, wow, data centers are consuming more electricity than Irish households. And you know that those data centers are only going to steadily increase their consumption. When we come back to where we started this conversation about sustainability and net zero, and you're looking at data centers, how do we make sure that they are being sustainable? Are they using renewable energies to deploy all of the energy resources that are going to take? And that's increasing exponentially. So I worry that there might be a bit of a train wreck as we move through this in terms of the power usage and the consumption. But tools like quantum, the chips that we're using to deploy this can hopefully be part of that solution in terms of how we can be more efficient in our consumption of data.
Thank you. Thank you for that little bit of light at the end of the tunnel there. Quantum and chips. I just want to talk about regulation. There's a lot of conversation around regulation. Do you feel regulation has a place to play in this?
Regulation has a huge role to play here. I think it's readily acknowledged that governments blew it with respect to social media and regulation of social media. And now we're living with the downside of that. So hopefully governments can understand and see what they need to do. But again, balance is key here. Rules and regulations are important. Some people feel like maybe the EU has gone a bit too far. People look at the US and say it's the Wild West. Is there some middle ground for the UK? And I think balance is key here. But as we look at our regulatory bodies like the CMA or the FCA, who are looking at AI, how did we get the balance right with them? And they both have a good track record, particularly the CFA, on looking at regulation in conjunction with innovation. I mean, I'll never forget a few years ago, I was speaking at a big event in Beijing, and I was talking about UK fintech and why we've been so successful and rule of law. And I talked about the Financial Conduct Authority. And I didn't have to speak about them because the two Chinese speakers before me were waxing lyrical about British rule of law, the Financial Conduct Authority, their innovation sandboxes, how they work together with disruptors to figure out what is the best regulation. The UK and the UK regulatory bodies, I think, do that really well. So I think and hope this new government looks at that and says, let's get the balance right. let's not overdo it on regulation, let's not underdo it, but let's figure out how we have a good regulatory environment that fosters innovation.
Yeah, I think that's really spot on. You did talk about, when we talked about the advice for companies, you talked about how employees feel about AI. I just wanted to pick up on that because you've been very helpful in our Summer of AI. You did a really brilliant session, sort of painting a picture of the landscape and what's coming down. Are you seeing things like that elsewhere as well?
I am. I think the KPMG Summer of AI initiative is brilliant, and this was the second year running. And I love the way that you really tried to open it up to everybody in the organization so that they feel comfortable with it. Other companies are starting to do it. I haven't seen enough of that elsewhere, which can also come back to the issue around how do you make your employees feel comfortable with it? How do you give them master classes or overviews about what does AI mean for the company and what does AI mean for you in your individual role and job? What tools should you be using? How can you feel comfortable and be transparent about it's okay to use AI. And so the more we can share that with people, I think the better.
You are incredibly passionate about the sector, as comes through in our conversation. How do you sustain yourself?
Good question. How do I sustain myself? I mean, in terms of me, I run every day. I target 20,000 steps. I try and stay fit and healthy. Because you're running a global network, you want to be accessible and available, but I also need time for myself. So there are things that I've learned to do over the years that kind of sustain me from a physical point of view and to a degree from a mental point of view. But I'm also very fortunate. I always say to people, I have the best job in the world. I get up from bed in the morning and I feel like I have great purpose. I love what we do as a community. I get messages, conversations, emails from people all around the world saying, this happened to me through this community and it's made a difference. And that gives me such a jolt every single day that's also what sustains me.
It's interesting. I was talking to an entrepreneur not that long ago who's in the tech ecosystem, and they said to me, there isn't a business that I've touched that Russ hasn't touched already. But that was before they'd actually entered. And then the other thing they said is there isn't a question I can't ask Russ.
Oh, right.
Which I think is really interesting because you are over the issues. So it's not just the connection; it's also the advice and counsel that you give them.
Well,
so I think,
and sometimes I don't have all the answers, but I've got 40,000 people I can go to find an answer, and that's the beauty of this.
Really.
And I know, you talk about how I respond. I know many of our advocates respond as quickly. This person needs help. They've got a burning issue. Can you help them? And I'm astonished. 5 minutes later, they're on it and they go. And I love that.
That's the power of the collective.
It is.
When you're all, when you're all looking to help each other
Yes.
come to the outcome. My final question for you today is, in your experience, I mean, you've had an incredible career in tech yourself, as well as running Global Tech Advocates in London Tech. If you could go back and give yourself a bit of advice, what would you give yourself?
It's a good question. One of the things, because I do mentor quite a few people, one of the things I say, particularly to younger people, is as you look at your career, and I wish I would have adopted a bit more of this myself, as you look at your career, there are two things that you take with you forever. One is your network. So start building and nurturing your network now. That will be with you as you go through life. And, 30 years ago, LinkedIn didn't exist, but it does today. And you can connect with lots of people or through lots of organizations like mine. And the second is your reputation. So don't screw it up. Think about your reputation. Think about how you present yourself, your leadership, your communication skills. We all make mistakes, and that's fine, but also how you address those mistakes that you make can actually enhance your reputation or further destroy your reputation. Once you've seriously damaged your reputation, it's really, really hard to get it back. So those are the two things that I say. And then underlying it all and learning from myself, because I was in some roles over the years that I didn't particularly enjoy. Find something that you like, have a passion about it. And if you're passionate about what you're doing every day, you're going to succeed no matter what.
Well, what you've definitely done is inspired people listening to this, because you can find your passion and you give back. You started this conversation around your purpose is about giving back to the community that actually, you've built your career in. And, the way that you support, you are an ambassador for the community. Look, it's been an absolutely wonderful conversation.
Thank you.
I could always
Likewise.
talk to you for a lot more time, but thank you so much.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me. Great to speak.